This is Lindsay McLeod Garcia, and this is my third series geared towards teens. This time we're looking at the LGBTQ plus community that's at risk and setting up an outreach program. The objectives for this are to educate on culturally appropriate context and to create an outreach for support that includes the community, as well as integrating an awareness of how values and beliefs can impact care delivered to diverse clients. Go ahead and take the pre-test before you start this presentation, and we'll take it again at the end. Thanks. The LGBTQ plus community is in need of an outreach to help educate the community on options available to help maintain a healthy life. The goals are to engage the community into discussions that meet privacy criteria while still being able to communicate what is available to them for support. Barriers to creating this are creating a feeling of safety, privacy, and security. The health and safety issues that are unique to this community are homelessness, violence, and family rejection. We'll get into all three of these issues in the next slides. Bullying is one of the barriers that does affect a healthy LGBTQ plus youth. 78 to 86% of these teens experience verbal abuse at school about their sexual orientation or gender. A quarter of them are physically attacked. This doesn't just happen from other students, it's done by teachers and staff at the school. This increases their risk for leaving school, depression, anxiety, suicide, homelessness, and risky behavior that can cause HIV infections. There is the Student Non-Discrimination Act that was put into place that is to protect these teens against bullying and harassment, and those consequences for that include loss of funding and legal action. We'll talk about this act later in the presentation. Another barrier for these teens is that half of them have no support from their parents. This goes along with increasing their depression, suicidal thoughts and behaviors, substance abuse, and risky sexual behaviors. Family support, if they have it, also often helps create a barrier against these health risks. They're helping to keep their teens safe. There was an act called Reconnecting Youth to Prevent Homelessness Act. It's a bill that was introduced to try to provide federal support to improve family relationships so that it would decrease the homelessness in the LGBTQ plus community. This act would help provide education, behavior interventions, help with family acceptance, and teach the families how to support their children. This act was not reintroduced to Congress, but it would greatly benefit these teens and their families. It is something we'll talk about again later, and things that can be done to try to get some of these laws and these safety measures in place for these teenagers to remain safe. The third barrier that stands between LGBTQ plus youth is homelessness. So 20 to 40% of homeless youth are LGBTQ plus. This affects their development and can cause mental and physical health issues. They're more likely to have unprotected sexual intercourse, which increases their risk for HIV. They're often vulnerable to exploitation and abuse. Some engage in prostitution to help meet their basic needs on the streets. 62% have attempted suicide. There is the Runaway and Homeless Youth Act, provides services for homeless youth, but is not specific to the LGBTQ plus community. There needs to be funding to continue the program in general, but it also needs to be more inclusive to this community. So even though it is good to have for all teenagers that are homeless and need that support, to have something that's specific for this community and their specific needs to help keep them safe, it's unique to them, as far as how they're feeling about their identity and how they're being treated, that programs to focus on this would be greatly beneficial. Creating an outreach program specific for the LGBTQ plus community would help provide resources, education, and support to these teens. Since a lot of them are homeless, they don't have the basic needs for hygiene. They need help getting off of the streets, help finishing their education, reconnecting with their families, and education on the risky behaviors that they are at risk for. So just the next few slides will go over a plan to create an outreach program and the goals for that, as well as the legislature and additional programs that are needed. So it is time for a change. Legislature is starting to recognize the needs that are for the LGBTQ plus youth, but it has not gone far enough to help with providing the safety for them. There needs to be work to get the funding for programs to educate communities, provide support, and help provide for their basic needs. The community, I don't think, is often aware of the risks that these teens have. Even reading the numbers myself about how many are homeless and how many are bullied, it's astonishing that this is happening to these children. And I think educating them and bringing the community together for this cause is important. Recruitment of volunteers is needed to help with finding the youth, to connect with them and providing health information to them, and knowing that there is support for them without judgment, that's just caring and wanting them to have the best possible future that they can have. To create a successful outreach program geared toward these teenagers, there needs to be work that's done. So volunteers are needed to go on the streets to help meet these teens. There needs to be packs made up that have contact information and resources, along with toiletries and things, especially if they're homeless. Setting up a home base to filter in calls, provide education and a safe space for them to come to, especially if there's violence that's happening in their home, in their relationships, and by others. They need to feel like there is some place that they can go to and turn to that is good for them. People that need to be involved in this process are law enforcement, school nurses and counselors, church officials, homeless shelters, healthcare providers, to educate them on the goals and the risks that these teens are at. And again, I don't know if everyone is aware of the increased battle that these kids have to deal with on a day-to-day basis, and having people that can help. They might know more tactics and providing input on different things, and watching for those kids that do need help. There needs to be presentations and a committee to organize events, volunteer time, go on social media, make flyers, to have different ways to connect with these teenagers to get them the support that they need. To be culturally competent with these teens so that they understand that this is a place of caring and concern, the people and the volunteers that will be dealing with this subgroup need to be aware of language, beliefs, and attitudes, behaviors of the culture, and to be respectful of that. This goes along with using pronouns and preferences and their identity. There is the Office of Minority Health that sets standards for culturally and linguistically appropriate care, but it does not specifically pertain to the LGBTQ plus community. So they still are one of the underrepresented groups. Education needs to be done and interventions to teach how to be specific for this patient, the LGBTQ plus patient. There can't be assumptions made, and that showing that level of respect shows that there is caring. Healthcare providers and volunteers need to be educated on the needs specific to this community, like the homelessness, family rejection, bullying. These bring along some mental health issues that need to be addressed, as well as finding ways to keep them safe. In doing research for this, it's found that there are not many laws in place to protect LGBTQ plus children. It's important to work on changing these. Elected officials need to be contacted, Congress members, mayors, city council, governors. There needs to be more in place. When I did the research, there's only one law, and that's the anti-bullying. The other things have not been introduced and actually are not as specific to this community. The federal organizations like GLAAD and human rights organizations need to be contacted to make this a priority, create a movement for change. The more people we get involved and the more that become aware of this problem, it can help make things better as we go forward in the future. It's important to learn what is out there to protect the LGBTQ plus children and remind those in charge on the need for protection for these kids. So the Student Non-Discrimination Act is in place to stop the discrimination and bullying of the LGBTQ plus children in public schools. As said earlier, there is a large amount of bullying that happens, 78 to 86%. It's also found that the abuse they were subject to greatly impacted their education. They would drop out of school. It would affect their physical health. And the purpose of this act is to prohibit this behavior with consequences to the school, including loss of funding. The next act that was introduced actually by John Kerry in 2011 is Reconnecting Youth to Prevent Homelessness Act. It did not get enacted, and it was not placed and has not been placed in to be voted on since. It was focusing on foster care, temporary assistance for needy families, making sure that children get to stay with their families even if they're homeless and not be placed in foster care, and that the states work with the family and other agencies to find more permanent housing. The focus was on improving family relationships with the LGBTQ plus children. I said earlier, there is a lot of rejection that happens. So again, this bill was not reintroduced to Congress, but the programs that they were looking at would make a lot of difference to these teenagers and their families to help keep them healthy. The Runaway and Homeless Youth Act was changed to the Runaway and Homeless Youth and Trafficking Act of 2019. It was introduced to Congress in November of last year. It was for those at high risk for sexual exploitation, sex trafficking, and substance abuse. The plan was to help with grants to help reach those teens, helping with mental health and substance abuse treatment, sexual abuse prevention. It was initially started in 1974, but there were changes made to it to make it more to the current times. And there is nothing else that's been said about this act at this time. All of these things are part of the reason why it's so important to vote and to get involved. I think that as a community, it's our duty to look out for these children. They are around us. They're people we don't even realize that these things are happening to. They could be friends, friends' children's and things like that. So it's important to use the skills that you have to look out for those that need it. That includes helping with making outreach programs, talking to legislature people, contacting those in charge, and helping make life better for the LGBTQ plus community.